The night was thick with tension, a heavy mist clinging to the chain-link fences of Camp Valor, one of the most secure U.S. military installations on the East Coast. Dim floodlights struggled against the darkness, casting long, jagged shadows that merged with the surrounding pine forest. Somewhere, a lone owl cried out, its sound swallowed by the distant hum of generators and the low rumble of armored vehicles. Lieutenant Mara Kincaid stood alone on the elevated observation post, her hands steady on the massive .50 caliber Barrett M82. She breathed slowly, deliberately, her finger resting lightly against the trigger guard. Around her neck, under the high collar of her tactical jacket, glinted a small, unassuming pin. The emblem of the legendary sniper unit, a unit whispered about in military circles, one whose members could change the course of a battle with a single, precise shot. Her eyes scanned the perimeter. A convoy had been reported moving under the cover of night. Intelligence suggested high-risk cargo. But Mara didn't flinch. Years of training, months of deployments, and countless missions had honed her reflexes to a razor's edge. She didn't need fear to guide her. She had discipline, and she had patience. Footsteps echoed behind her on the metal catwalk. Mara didn't need to turn to know who it was. General Lawrence Whitaker, a man whose reputation for discipline and intimidation rivaled the strictest drill sergeant, approached. He walked with a measured stride, eyes scanning the perimeter, but his attention was caught by her rifle. The Barrett M82 gleamed under the cold light, its barrel as long as a man's forearm. To any other officer, it was just another heavy sniper rifle. But the way Mara handled it, the calm, precise readiness, spoke volumes. Whitaker's jaw tightened. His gaze drifted lower, catching the pin at her collar. The world seemed to freeze. The distant hum of the bass, the rustle of the wind through the pines, even the faint creak of the catwalk beneath their boots all fell silent in that instant. Whitaker's eyes widened ever so slightly, a flash of recognition and disbelief crossing his face. The pin of the legendary sniper unit, a symbol of excellence, of courage, of lives saved in the shadows, was not something one stumbled upon by chance. You're, the general began, his voice catching for the first time in decades of commanding troops. Mara didn't answer. She had been trained to speak with action, not words. Her presence, her discipline, her unwavering focus said everything. Whitaker, a man used to commanding entire brigades, had never felt this small, this uncertain. Behind them, the night remained silent. But Mara's heartbeat, steady and deliberate, was louder than any gunfire. Mara's identity and past missions unravel, a story of courage that challenged not just the enemy, but corruption within the military's inner ranks. As Whitaker realizes the truth, the stakes rise. A covert operation, hidden agendas, and a moral choice that could cost lives. Use pauses and emphasis on visual and emotional details. Example, her hands, steady, her eyes, scanning. The rifle, massive, yet familiar in her grasp. Highlight internal thoughts without dialogue overload. Audiences feel tension in her silent strength. The night deepened. Mist curled like ghostly fingers along the edges of the perimeter, and the floodlights cast long, trembling shadows that danced across the asphalt. Mara kept her gaze fixed on the distant tree line, where movement had been reported earlier. Every muscle in her body was alert, yet calm, a paradox only those trained to operate in lethal silence could understand. General Whitaker lingered behind her, uncharacteristically silent. His usual authority, the iron certainty that had kept entire battalions in line, seemed to falter in the presence of her pin. The sniper unit was a legend. Members were almost mythic. Warriors who had operated in the darkest corners of conflict zones, achieving impossible objectives while remaining unseen, unacknowledged, yet utterly lethal. Whitaker finally spoke, his voice measured, almost hesitant. "You served in Kandahar?" Mara's eyes didn't waver from her target. Multiple tours, precision ops, overwatch assignments, standard deployment rotations. The words were factual, almost cold, but Whitaker knew better. He had heard the whispers of Mara Kincaid, a soldier who had saved entire squads, disrupted enemy networks, and yet remained ghost-like in official records. Few in the military hierarchy could reconcile her existence with protocol, chain of command, or the bureaucratic paperwork that defined careers. "You were recommended for Medal of Valor," he said, almost as if afraid to speak it aloud. Mara allowed a brief pause, the silence thickening like fog between them. It was never approved. Chain of command? Didn't see the need. Whitaker's jaw tightened. He had fought to climb ranks honestly, had enforced the rules, and yet here was a soldier whose moral courage and effectiveness outstripped him, and yet whose deeds had been buried. Corruption. Fear of controversy. Fear of someone unflinching, unyielding, and undeniably competent. A rustle in the tree line drew Mara's attention. She shifted slightly, scanning, assessing. The convoy intelligence was correct. Shadows of figures moving quickly, deliberately. Whitaker instinctively reached for his radio, but Mara raised a single hand. No words, no order. She had eyes only for the threat. Her mind worked like clockwork, tactical analysis running in parallel with moral calculation. She knew the enemy wouldn't hesitate, and neither would she. But tonight was not just about engagement. It was about proving, quietly, that courage without compromise could still exist in the military hierarchy. She whispered, barely audible, "Wait for the signal. Observe first." Whitaker, for the first time, deferred. He watched silently as Mara crouched behind a concrete barricade, her silhouette merging with the darkness. Fingers adjusted the scope, breath steady, mind clear. Time slowed, and then a single movement, a misstep by one of the approaching figures. Mara's finger twitched on the trigger, not firing yet. Patience was the sniper's weapon. Whitaker could feel it. This was not just skill. This was discipline refined into art. The radio crackled in the distance, reporting minor disturbances along another perimeter post. Mara ignored it. Everything else was secondary. The mission, the lives at stake, demanded focus. And then, the true test arrived. An unexpected presence appeared on the perimeter. A high-ranking officer from a different command, known for strict adherence to bureaucratic control rather than battlefield pragmatism. He began barking orders, ignoring Mara's carefully prepared overwatch positioning. The enemy had not yet appeared, but the tension escalated instantly. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. He realized the potential disaster. Interference from someone who neither understood the terrain nor respected the chain of command on the ground could jeopardize the operation and lives. Mara didn't flinch. One hand adjusted the scope, the other steady on the rifle. No words, no appeal. The presence of the sniper unit pin alone conveyed authority to those who knew its meaning. A warning unspoken, but undeniable. The interloper hesitated. Something about Mara, the silent confidence, the precision in her posture, the legacy pin reflecting faint moonlight, made him pause. Whitaker felt the weight of history in that instant. Mara's career, her courage, her moral compass, all of it demanded recognition, even from those who thrived in bureaucracy. The tension thickened. The mist rolled over the perimeter, swallowing movements and muffling sound. Somewhere, an owl cried out again, eerie and solitary, like a herald of judgment. Mara's eyes caught movement again, but this time, the threat was more complicated than simple insurgents. It was moral. Corruption, fear, and arrogance that could destroy lives from the inside. The sniper's mission was no longer just survival. It was truth. It was justice. And it was the demonstration that courage could still bend authority when authority had gone astray. Whitaker stepped back, silently acknowledging the reality. Mara Kincaid was not just a soldier. She was a standard bearer for the conscience of the military, and he, for the first time, understood the limits of his own power. The night hung heavy, the fog rolling across the perimeter like a living thing. Mara Kincaid lay prone behind the concrete barricade, the M82 Barrett rifle steady beneath her shoulder. Her breath was measured, each exhale a whisper of control. Every muscle in her body was taut with awareness, attuned to the faintest disturbance in the night. Whitaker stood a few feet away, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes flicking between Mara and the perimeter. His mind raced. For decades, he had relied on procedure, on command hierarchy. Yet here he was, watching a young lieutenant embody everything he had long admired but never fully realized: moral courage, discipline, and quiet authority. Then the movement appeared. Subtle, deliberate, a shadow slipping through the mist toward the compound's eastern gate. Mara's finger hovered over the trigger, her eyes scanning the scope, processing trajectories, wind drift, even the faint pulse of fear from her target. "Hold position," she murmured to herself, though the words were more ritual than command. Whitaker didn't need to hear them. He instinctively understood. The interloper officer, the one who had challenged her authority earlier, was fumbling with his radio, barking uncoordinated orders. Mara's jaw tightened. Every second he wasted could cost lives. Whitaker's chest tightened as he realized the enormity of the situation. The mission's success and the safety of dozens of soldiers depended entirely on Mara's judgment. Then, a sound, a twig snapping beneath a boot. Her scope tracked the intruder, not the enemy, but one of her own, misdirected and unaware of the sniper overwatch. Mara didn't hesitate. A soft, precise whistle to redirect the soldier. No shots fired, no panic, control maintained. Whitaker exhaled, a fraction of relief flooding him. He realized something fundamental. Mara's power wasn't in her rifle, it was in her discipline and decisiveness under pressure. Then the true threat emerged. From the tree line, figures moved with coordinated precision, well-trained, armed, and intent on breaching the perimeter. The enemy had exploited the night, waiting for the missteps of complacent command. Mara's heart rate remained steady. Years of training had prepared her for this moment. She adjusted the scope. The first shot was not a kill. It was a message, precise, clean, and undeniable. One figure dropped silently, another halted mid-stride, confusion rippling through the enemy formation. Mara's second shot disabled the vehicle attempting to flank the eastern gate, each bullet a masterstroke of skill and restraint. Whitaker's eyes widened. The stories were true. The sniper unit's members did not just shoot, they orchestrated the battlefield from the shadows, and Mara, despite her youth, was executing their legacy flawlessly. But the operation wasn't over. The interloper officer had now realized Mara's authority, and his pride clashed with his survival instincts. He approached the barricade, attempting to assert command verbally. "Lieutenant, step aside! This is my operation!" he barked, voice slicing through the mist. Mara didn't flinch. She didn't lower the rifle. The pin of the sniper unit gleamed faintly under the floodlights. Whitaker's hand instinctively went to his chest, a flicker of recognition passing through him. This wasn't just another officer. This was discipline incarnate, a living embodiment of courage and moral clarity. "You're in my sector. You follow my orders. Lives depend on it," Mara said, voice low, calm, and unwavering. For the first time, the interloper hesitated. The weight of her presence, her skill, and her history was undeniable. Whitaker stepped forward, placing a hand on the officer's shoulder, firm, commanding. "She has the authority. Trust her." In that instant, everything shifted. Mara's eyes returned to the field. The enemy, now disoriented by her shots and unwavering control, faltered. One final calculated engagement and the threat was neutralized. No chaos, no unnecessary casualties, just precision, courage, and control. The night returned to its quiet state. The mist curled like smoke from a distant fire. Mara exhaled, lowering the rifle, the tension finally releasing in a long, measured breath. Whitaker approached, slow, deliberate, as if each step carried the weight of acknowledgement, decades in the making. "Lieutenant Kincaid," he began, voice husky with emotion he rarely allowed. "You've saved lives tonight. Not just with skill, but with courage, with discipline, and with integrity." Mara allowed herself a small nod. No words. The battlefield had spoken for her. Whitaker's eyes lingered on the pin at her collar. The symbol of the sniper unit, the legacy of unseen heroes, now carried its full weight in the reality of one soldier's actions. A lesson etched in steel and silence. True courage often operates in quiet, unrecognized ways, but when it stands, it commands respect, even from those at the highest ranks. As dawn broke, light creeping over the misty compound, Mara stood alone on the barricade. Whitaker watched from below, understanding that the night's lessons were not just tactical, they were moral. She had demonstrated that integrity, discipline, and courage could overcome fear, corruption, and arrogance, even in the highest echelons of command. And in that moment, Mara Kincaid became more than a soldier. She became a symbol of unwavering moral strength, of the quiet power that comes from standing firm when the world expects compromise. The first rays of dawn cut through the mist, spilling light over the compound. The night's tension still lingered in the cold air, a residue of fear, precision, and unspoken truths. Mara Kincaid lowered her 50 cal Barrett M82 one last time, resting the massive rifle on the barricade. Every movement was deliberate, as if she were still holding the night in her hands. Whitaker approached, his boots crunching on the frost-covered asphalt. Around the compound, soldiers moved quietly, checking equipment, reporting statuses, and tending to minor injuries. The operation had been a success, but the ripple of what had just occurred extended far beyond tactical victory. "You did well," Whitaker said, voice measured, but carrying the weight of acknowledgement. "More than well. Flawlessly. You kept everyone alive, and you taught a lesson we all need to remember." Mara's expression remained calm, almost unreadable, though her eyes betrayed the exhaustion that came from holding tension for hours. "It wasn't just me," she said. "The men and women out there, they followed orders. They trusted the plan. You only win with discipline, communication, and trust, not ego." Whitaker's gaze drifted to the interloper officer, who now avoided eye contact, silently absorbing the rebuke that had no words. Mara's presence had corrected arrogance, and the lesson was unmistakable. Competence and integrity could not be ignored, no matter the rank. "Sir," Mara said quietly, "the real risk was never the enemy. It was the interference, misguided orders, fear of accountability, disregard for mission parameters. That's what kills soldiers faster than bullets." Whitaker nodded slowly. He had lived his career by rules and procedure, but tonight revealed something deeper. The battlefield demanded more than protocol. It demanded moral courage. In the aftermath, Mara moved through the compound, checking on her team, confirming status reports, and ensuring that every detail was accounted for. No soldier had been injured beyond minor scrapes. Equipment was intact. Every element of the operation had been precise, a reflection of her preparation, patience, and experience. Later, in the debriefing room, Whitaker called a meeting with his senior staff. The air was heavy with the unspoken tension of what had transpired. Reports were read, commendations noted, and questions answered. Yet an underlying truth hung in the room. The lessons Mara embodied were not taught in manuals. They were demonstrated in the field, in real time, under the harshest conditions. One by one, Whitaker recounted her actions, how she had neutralized the threat with surgical precision, how she had preserved life through restraint, and how her silent authority had overridden potentially catastrophic interference. Every officer in the room shifted uncomfortably. Some felt pride, some felt exposed. All understood, viscerally, that a new standard had been set. Finally, Whitaker addressed Mara directly, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. "Lieutenant Kincaid, it's time that recognition met reality. You've saved lives, enforced discipline, and reminded us all of what true leadership looks like. I am recommending a full commendation for your actions tonight, and not just for skill, for moral courage, integrity, and unwavering discipline." Mara's shoulders lifted slightly, the faintest hint of relief in her eyes. But it wasn't about medals. It never had been. This was about accountability, truth, and proving that honor could exist in the face of fear, bureaucracy, and corruption. As she stepped outside, the sun broke fully over the horizon. Light spilled over the compound, illuminating the world in shades of gold and pale blue. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of frost, metal, and the forest beyond the fence. Mara's gaze lingered on the distant tree line, a reminder that the mission was never just about the immediate enemy, but about the integrity and vigilance required to guard against chaos, both outside and within. Whitaker approached quietly, a rare softness in his expression. "You've set a standard tonight that I hope the entire force will remember, not because of the rifle you carried, but because of the courage you embody. The sniper unit pin isn't just a symbol of skill, it's a symbol of conscience." Mara nodded silently. For her, the night's victories were measured not in accolades, but in lives preserved, truths upheld, and the invisible threads of morality strengthened within the institution she served. The compound was quiet now. Dawn had fully broken, scattering the last traces of mist across the asphalt and into the pine forest beyond. Soldiers moved with measured purpose, cleaning weapons, reporting statuses, and tending to the aftermath of a night that had tested more than their physical skill. It had tested their integrity, discipline, and courage. Mara Kincaid stood atop the barricade, her M82 resting lightly at her side. The sun glinted off the steel of the rifle, but her eyes were on something far heavier, the unspoken tension still lingering in the officer ranks, the subtle ripples of authority challenged and corrected by one soldier's quiet resolve. Whitaker approached slowly, his usual commanding presence softened by reflection. "Lieutenant, there's one more matter," he said, voice low, measured. "The interloper officer, his chain of command will attempt to write this night off as a procedural error. They'll try to dismiss what you've done because it doesn't fit their narrative." Mara's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. "Then we'll make sure the record is correct. Truth doesn't care about ego." Whitaker nodded. He had spent decades navigating the hierarchy, learning that rules often shielded the timid and punished the brave. But Mara's actions had illuminated something that no manual or protocol could contain. Moral courage coupled with skill demanded recognition. The interloper officer appeared, flustered but attempting to maintain composure. His voice faltered as he spoke, trying to justify his earlier interference. Mara didn't respond. She simply placed a hand on the rifle, the pin of the sniper unit catching the sunlight. That small emblem carried decades of legacy, and its presence alone silenced any pretense of authority built on arrogance rather than competence. Whitaker stepped between them. "She has the authority," he said firmly. "Not because of rank, but because of integrity, judgment, and courage. The chain of command follows merit, not ego. And tonight, she saved lives that would have been lost if not for her discipline." The interloper officer swallowed hard, finally understanding the lesson he had been unwilling to learn in the heat of the night. Recognition wasn't optional. Courage couldn't be ignored. Authority had a moral dimension, and it demanded accountability. Mara exhaled, feeling the tension of hours release like the last breath of a storm. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. Her satisfaction came from the clarity of justice, the preservation of life, and the affirmation that the principles she embodied, courage, discipline, and moral clarity, had triumphed over fear, corruption, and arrogance. Whitaker's gaze lingered on her, a rare softness breaking through decades of military rigidity. "The sniper unit pin isn't just a symbol of skill," he said quietly, almost reverently. "It's a symbol of conscience. And tonight, you reminded all of us what that truly means." The soldiers began to clear the perimeter. The hum of generators returned. Birds chirped cautiously in the pines. The world, once heavy with tension and unseen threats, now felt ordered, balanced, yet alive with the memory of what had transpired in the shadows. Mara shouldered her rifle. She walked along the barricade, scanning the perimeter one last time. Her actions tonight had proven a simple truth. Courage isn't always loud, and heroism isn't always celebrated. But when discipline meets conscience, it commands respect, changes outcomes, and shapes history. Whitaker followed her gaze silently. The moral lesson was clear. Leadership was not just about rank or procedure. It was about integrity, judgment, and the quiet authority that comes from acting rightly when no one else will. As Mara descended from the barricade, the sunlight illuminated her path forward, a metaphor for the clarity and justice that had been restored. The mist of doubt, fear, and corruption had lifted, and the legacy of the sniper unit, embodied in her, would continue, not in myth, but in the disciplined courage of those who followed her example. The day would be remembered not for medals or accolades, but for a truth far more enduring. Discipline, courage, and moral integrity are the true weapons of those who serve. Mara Kincaid didn't need recognition to know her worth. She had proven that quiet strength, unwavering focus, and the courage to act rightly could overcome fear, corruption, and the arrogance of authority. And in the silent acknowledgement of a general who had once questioned her authority, she found the only validation that truly mattered, that courage, when guided by conscience, leaves a legacy far greater than rank or title ever could. True courage is silent, true power is disciplined, and true leadership is measured not by orders given, but by integrity upheld when the world expects compromise.